Hi, this is Shane Starr, and today we're doing our fourth in a series of 8 videos in a unique series where I'm combining my passion in typology with my education and experience in philosophy to help our viewers live their best lives. We're doing this by targeting specific functions and later Enneagram fixations for improvement using philosophical masterpieces as roadmaps pointing us towards self-realization in these realms. So, as I've said in earlier videos, our method for doing this that I think is agreed upon in most typology circles, as well as my own personal studies and experience. We're looking at the third, fourth, and eighth functions in MBTI. That's your tertiary, inferior, and demon function. And these same 3 functions in Socionics would be the mobilizing, the suggestive, and the role function. So we're kind of combining them together to pinpoint areas of growth. We're not looking at the lead functions or the demo function or the ignoring function or the creative function. Why? Because we're already good at those. We're not looking at the polar function either. Why? Because we're pretty much hopeless in that function, at least if the theories are correct. So we're looking for best target areas for improvement, and I think there is ground to be gained in looking at all the functions and seeing if you can't find ways to improve yourself across the board. So today we're on one of my favorite functions. It's right there, first or second, and that is TE, extroverted thinking. So first, I like to start by saying how I understand the function. And the way I define the functions is I look at all my trusted resources, the best out there. I think all my viewers, all my serious viewers anyway, know they have their own definitions of the functions. My method is take the best, make a big Venn diagram, and anything that doesn't overlap and fit in that middle section gets cut out. So what we're left with is a very shaved down, good, solid definition that almost everyone will agree on. So TE is one of the easier ones, I think. It's more difficult when we think of SI or NI. I think those are 2 difficult ones. And then I think with Socionics and MBTI, FI and FE can actually switch and get messed up. So looking at our trusted resources, and I'm not going to list who they are. If someone wants to know, I'll list them in the comments. But here we go. Extrovert thinking is irrational. It's debated whether it's objective or subjective. For the purposes of pragmatism, I'm going to say objective. A rational objective function, or informational metabolism element, best described as practical logic. There's other ways to say that, but let's think practical logic. That's everyday what makes good sense. It deals with external activity of objects, work, even behavior of others, and how these things can be optimized or made better. I would say efficiency comes to mind. That's a big goal of extroverted thinking, efficiency. If SE is the what, TE is the how. And it uses objective, external information to make decisions, and it focuses on tangible results, and to the exclusion of other considerations, like even moral considerations or value, heartfelt considerations. This is just looking for the quickest, best, easiest, practical way to do things. All right. So what are some points? Good TE versus bad TE. I would say good TE. It's useful, beneficial, economical, facts focused, being practical versus being useless, wasteful, worthlessness, nonsensical ideas, things that don't have any, for lack of a better word, cash value. Um, Further examples of people who struggle with this function, I wrote some down for my notes. I would say difficulty with objective reasoning. Now that could be low TI too, but we all know in the theory if you have polar either of the thinking functions, your other thinking function's not going to be that great either. So you'll see some overlap. Bad TI, bad TE. Difficulty with objective reasoning, particularly when we're talking TE, it comes in practical matters with regards to applying logic to decision making. Again, I use this for TI also, but betting on your favorite team even when they're statistical underdogs. I would say poor efficiency, following directions. I would say putting together furniture. That's something that people with bad TE really struggle with. You know, it's like with TI, you can catch someone with bad TI because they can't do logical problems. They like simple IQ tests, even if they're smart. You know, I mean, look at Logan Paul. He's an ESFP. Practically speaking, he must be smarter than me because look how much money he makes and having fun doing it. And then here I am doing this for free, right? Um, you know, but put me in an IQ test against him, and I bet I'll come out on top. People with a low TI have difficulty with logical problems and IQ like testing. Now, with TE, that comes in the form of practical directions, things like putting together furniture. That, to me, that's the key. Maybe superfluous, but I can't make a logical argument for it. But everyone with bad TE seems to have trouble putting together furniture for some reason. They think they got it, and then they flip the table around, and the L shaped is going the wrong way, and they have to take it apart and put it back. They have problems following directions oftentimes. Like at work, you tell them, here's the 4 steps to, like in my job, doing a move out. First you take the notice, then you have to sign it, then you have to get the keys, you count the keys, you go in the system, you take them out of the system, you go to the keys, return the keys to stock, and they're like, wait, you're going too fast, and you have to explain it to them like 5-6 times, and then they still miss one of those steps. That's poor TE. I would say struggles in formulating concrete plans. You most notice people with bad TE when they have difficulty at work, especially in an office setting, especially in any kind of corporate setting. Those are the ones who just can't seem to get it right. They're trying, but their desk is a mess. There's just things aren't organized. They don't know what they're doing. They don't know how to prioritize things that well. You give them a list of 5 things to do. One is an emergency. The last is something that needs to be done, but you could almost delegate that to someone else. They'll mix them all up. They won't know what order to do the things in. And those are some good TE tests, I think. But let's move on to our author. Our author is William James, and apropos to our subject today, this is a book called Pragmatism. But back to the author. William James, his dates are 1842 to 1910. He was born in New York, attended Harvard Medical School. He taught psychology at Harvard. When I was at Yale reading his work, I was like, I wish he would have went to Yale, but whatever. That's a dumb comment, doesn't matter. But William James was very entrenched in the scientific field, in science itself, medical practice. clinical psychology, and he also happened to be deeply religious. Now, that's not why I picked him. As you know, I picked Jean-Paul Sartre, who was like as atheist as anyone comes. So I'm not prejudiced in my picking of work that way. But James was a very religious person, and being very intelligent too. He was always looking for a way to combine the cold-hearted, as he put it, tough-minded, empirical person together with the soft-hearted, more ideational person. And he thought that there could be some sort of, not so much a compromise, but a synthesis of getting the best of both. And he thought he found it in his philosophy he called pragmatism. So, in short, pragmatism is deciding between competing theories by examining the practical consequences of each one, and then that's your better one. A good simple illustration of this would be, I'm looking at cars. Should I get a truck or should I get a car? If you live somewhere and you do work where you have to carry a lot of things, that's an easy, even if you really like the car and that's your favorite model and you've always wanted one since you're a little kid, practical considerations might point you in the direction of the truck if that's the kind of work you do. Likewise, if you work in an office like me and you love trucks and they look cool and you want to be like all macho and stuff, a car would still make more sense because, what am I going to do? Throw my suitcase in the back, and you don't even need a suitcase at my job. So a truck doesn't make any practical sense. There, in a forthcoming video, I have a real life example of this, but actually I think I'll use it in this one because I recently had a sports car that I really loved. It was a Jaguar F-Type, and I had to get rid of it, and for TE reasons. Even though it was my FI love of my life, TI, it made no sense to keep. So TE, so TE won over FI, and that was tough, but life goes on. So let's look more closely at William James's pragmatism. An introduction to this philosophical work. It is a specific philosophical alternative to rational, logical viewpoints versus a purely experiential, empirical standpoint in philosophy. Competing theories in philosophy. We've kind of gone through it already with his greater theory, but James wanted to combine the scientific exactness of the empiricists with the creativity and spiritual inclinations of the rationalists. When I say rationalists, I don't mean it in terms of cold atheistic rationalism, but more along the lines of systematic, like Hegel, thinking reason can go beyond what we can know by empiricism alone. So James thought again that pragmatism, he could get the best of both. And in short, the book simply asks questions like, what would be better for us to believe? What has better consequences? What has better results? And he uses like the theory of God versus materialism in one of his examples. It might be too long to read here, but he paints a picture of the atheistic point of view, and he says, the energy of our system will decay, the glory of the sun will be dimmed, the earth, tideless and inert, will no longer tolerate the human race. Matter will break down. There will be, all the world's immortal deeds and monuments will disappear as if they had not ever been seen or known, and this makes the world ultimately meaningless. On the other hand, the notion of God gives infinite meaning, not just to world achievements, but to our own personal decisions and our own personal lives. And he thinks that it's it's better for morality, better for our practical nature with regards to hope and legacy and wanting to do the right thing, um, not just for your own life, but for the lives of your loved ones and humanity. That lends itself to theism in his mind being better. Now, I know there's arguments against it. I'm just merely explaining how James applies pragmatism to something that he thought was important to show. Now, for me, it's simple, and I'll go back to my story, and you don't have to be religious or anti-religious to follow this. Ever since I was a little kid, I loved Jaguars. I thought the Jaguar car was my favorite car. The F-Type was like my dream car. I had it. Unfortunately, it broke down 8 different times in the first year I had it. I had pictures of it on my Instagram and stuff. It was like my baby. And then I got the job where I live in LA, but my job's in South Orange County. So it's like a 30-mile drive. And I had to really ask myself the hard question, if this is going to be my career with this wonderful company that I work for now, and I'm going to be committed to living where I live and working where I work, it is not practical to have a sports car that is prone to breakdowns as well as mechanical costs. Brakes alone run almost $4,000, and you got to fix them on the Jaguar every year. Car registration was over $1,000. Each tire costs about $1,000, $982. I remember because I had to get them. It just wasn't economical. And if you have 2 cars, it would be great as your fun car, but I didn't have 2 cars. I don't have 2 cars, so I have to have a good all-round car. And again, TE won over FI. Okay, so that's a good example of the sort of takeaway of what James is saying and what TE requires. Our featured takeaway quote, it's on page 88, but I haven't memorized. He basically says, ultimately makes a good philosophical argument step by step, leading up to this conclusion: the truth is what works well. I'll say that one more time. The truth is what works well. So we look for truth as a guide for how to live our lives. And by this definition, the truth is simply what works. So, according to James, we should live our lives according to pragmatism. It seems so simple. I'm watching your video, Shane, and I haven't learned anything. Of course, we have to live pragmatically. But I want you to think for a moment about all the regrets, mistakes. I guarantee you know someone who's had bankruptcies or divorces or, hospitals, courts, jail, ruined relationships, ruined careers, all because they couldn't simply live their lives pragmatically, So TE, it's an easy thing to figure out, maybe unlike some of the other functions, especially maybe the introverted ones, but it's not as easy as it looks. It's not as easy as it sounds. It's one thing to know the truth. You can read Hegel, and that book's like this thick, and you can know it all, but or I'll use a different example. If you are religious and you believe in the Bible, and I'm guilty of this for a long time, the book of James in the Bible is great. He just says, oh, you believe, that's great. Well, guess what? The demons believe too. And where do you think they're going? It's one thing to know the truth. know what the right thing is to do. Know not to cheat on your girlfriend or wife. Know not to lie or steal. Know not to hurt other people. It's a whole nother thing to live it. It takes a lot of courage to do the right thing. It's easy to know the right thing. I think if you have a conscience, more on that in the FI video. If you have a conscience, you know what you should do at every given stage of your life. It's having the power to do the right thing. That's the key. And so for James, an indispensable component of truth is pragmatic action. He makes one last example of James. He likens religious to belief to catching a ship sailing or like traveling. And it's like if you say, well, I know that ship's going to Europe, and so, well, I don't think it is. If you say you take the most sensible route and saying, well, I'm not sure if it does or doesn't. I think there's good arguments on both sides, so I'm just going to sit here and wait it out. Guess what? You've made your decision. And James says it's the same in religion. And I think he's right. On the surface, I think agnosticism's the best answer, because it takes a leap of faith to believe in God. It takes an equal, if not greater, I think, leap in faith to believe it'll just somehow happen by itself, some grand accident. So since we can't know, I guess the best things to do is just sit there on the sideline and, well, I don't know, so I'm not going to do anything. By doing that, you've made your side, if you realize it, or if you don't, you've picked your side anyway. And James makes that point. So when we think of extroverted thinking, we have to think of the most logical, practical, cost-effective, reasonable way forward. In short, TE is pragmatism. So let me jump now to changes. If you have not crap TE, but not great TE, it's kind of C student TE. How can you make it better? I think the first most important thing, and I mentioned this with TI, I think it's even more important with TE, you have to have brutal honesty, recognize and identify problem areas in your life. Make a list. Get a piece of paper, a pen, write down 5 main problem areas in your life, like what I did right before I changed my life around. I had no spiritual direction. I was overweight. I was in bad shape because of abusing my body too much. My relationships were crap, and I didn't have career direction. I needed to fix those things, and I made detailed steps on how to do it. And that's the key here. You can't just say, okay, I need to do better in school. That won't do it. That never does it. That's why so many people fail in their New Year's resolutions. And it's why someone like me does not fail in their New Year's resolutions. Because in order for TE, in order for pragmatism to work, you have to have specific, actionable goals. You have to have step-by-step goals, and you have to measure your progress. You have to check for progress, and you have to make adjustments. So instead of saying, I will do better in school, you say, I'm going to raise my science grade from a 76% to a 90% or better. I'm going to do this by dedicating the period of time, 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. every night, to do my work. And once a week on Wednesdays, I'm going to check in with a trusted class member who's doing better than me in the class, and I will review with them. And through these steps, I will achieve a 90 or better. Maybe you will, maybe you won't, but you'll be way better of a student having done that than just saying, oh yeah, man, I suck at school. I got to pick up my grades. Yeah, okay. See how well that way works out compared to the way I just laid out. Actionable goals, step by step, break it down into details. Okay. You can apply these same action steps to losing weight, saving money, quitting a bad habit, making a relationship better. But it's vitally important here to track your progress. To that end, I weigh myself every single day. I'm close to my target weight. I fluctuate. I get below it, then I go back above, but I'm always within like 5 pounds of it. And how do I do that? I weigh myself so much every day that I predict. It's rare that I'm wrong. If I'm wrong, I'm off by 1 pound. I know just by how I feel that day. I know what the scale's going to tell me. That's the level that I've honed in on with this, and down to the single pound. And most of the time, I guess it on the dot. So that's the kind of detailed focus on your goals that will drive you to success. Not this vague general, oh, I got to do better. That won't work. Okay. So you also have to consistently set pragmatism against your personal desires. I want ice cream right now. I'm still 2.5 pounds off my goal. Ice cream's going to have to wait. I'd love to have another Jaguar, but I have a long commute. My Jaguar broke down 8 times in the first year I had it alone. It has poor gas mileage and expensive maintenance. It doesn't make sense. I'm not going to do it. Use common sense in your decisions. Don't be stupid. All right? Practice making distinctions between your feelings and your thoughts. Be able to say such things like, I'm on the other side from this political candidate, but what he or she is saying right here, it's a good point. Now, did I vote for them? No. Do I agree with them on most things? No, but this is a good point. If you can do that, I can guarantee your TE is on the level of average to better than average, because people with low TI and low TE, they can't make a distinction. If they hate a political candidate, that political candidate could say 2 + 2 is 4, and they'll be like, no, he doesn't understand. He's lying, or she's lying, or whatever. They would never say that because they're dumb. They don't know what 2 + 2 is. That's how low thinking works. So practice being able to separate your feelings from your logic. Be able to say, I disagree on most things, but on this particular point, I agree. You're my best friend, but from what you're telling me about this problem you're having at work, that does sound like you, and I think they have a point. I think you need to look deeper into these criticisms of you and maybe make adjustments on your side. Instead of saying like, yeah, ride or die, you're my friend, F those other people. That's poor TE. That's probably poor TI too. But again, you want to be able to make those distinctions. Ultimately, TE is about the facts and living your life in accordance with those facts. And as a couple of well-known people love to say, facts don't care about our feelings. That's all I have for today. Next up is our feeling functions, followed by our intuitive functions. Those are coming up this week, starting with FI tomorrow. And after that, we're going to do Enneagram. And I have a really cool idea for the Enneagram videos during the following week. So that's it. Peace out.